623. This is 21 December 2020. Got about 3 hours of sleep. All right, this is going to be long, but I haven't read, I've skimmed it. I haven't read the whole thing through, so I'm going to find out as you find out. Palantir's Tiberius Race and the Public Health Panopticon, published December 9th, 2020. Source Unlimited Hangout. The place that I got this from was Blacklisted News. Operation Warp Speed, the public-private partnership created to produce and allocate COVID-19 vaccines to the American populace, is set to begin rolling out a mass vaccination campaign in the coming weeks. With the expected approval of its first vaccine candidate just days away, the allocation and distribution aspects of Operation Warp Speed deserve scrutiny, particularly given the critical role one of the most controversial companies in the country will play in that endeavor. Palantir Technologies, a company founded by Alex Karp, Peter Thiel, that's problematic, and a handful of their associates, has courted controversy for its supporting role in the U.S. military occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as a participation in the detention of illegal immigrants through their contracts with the Department of Homeland Security, and in predictive policing, law enforcement programs that disproportionately affect minority neighborhoods. Equally controversial, but perhaps lesser known, is Palantir's long-standing and enduring ties to the CIA and the intelligence community at large, which was intimately involved in the development of Palantir's products that now run on the databases of governments and corporations around the world. The same national security state that Palantir has long aided in oppressing countries abroad and minorities domestically is now running Operation Warp Speed. While Palantir's selection to manage the allocation of the vaccine to priority groups, in quotations, may just seem like the national security state wanting to award the contract to a familiar and trusted company, the allocation strategy's heavy focus on vaccinating minorities first, with questionable justification for doing so, suggests something else may have been behind Palantir's selection to play a prominent role in Warp Speed. Part 1 of this series on Operation Warp Speed and Race, the Johns Hopkins CDC plan to mask medical experimentation of minorities as racial justice, explored, I have not read that one. I'm going to have to read that one too. Explored Warp Speed's vaccine allocation program in depth. That plan utilizes a phased approach aimed at populations of focus, in quotations, that had been identified in advance by various government organizations, including the CDC's Advisory Council on Immunization Practices. The main focus of this allocation strategy is to deliver vaccines first to racial minorities in such a way as to make them feel at ease and not like guinea pigs. This is particularly glaring given that these minorities will be receiving an experimental vaccine that allocation strategy documents admit is likely to cause, quote, certain adverse effects more frequently in certain population subgroups, end quote, with research showing that these subgroups most at risk of experiencing adverse effects are these same racial minorities. Part 1 also showed that the government believes information warfare and economic coercion will likely be necessary to combat vaccine hesitancy among these minority groups. Interesting. So basically propaganda and economic coercion. Okay. Rather than directly targeting the actual causes of this hesitancy, namely by addressing past instances of illegal medical experimentation on minorities by the U.S. government. Fairly well documented. This report, the second part of this trilogy covering the racist underpinnings of key aspects of Operation Warp Speed, reveals the real factors behind Palantir's rise to prominence as a national security state contractor, and the real reason why this company was chosen to identify these same critical population minority groups that it has been helping the US government oppress and surveil since the company's inception. Tiberius Rising. On November 24th, 2020, Secretary Alex Azar of the Department of Health and Human Services, a former Eli Lilly executive, announced that the department would begin conducting practice runs for Operation Warp Speed's distribution networks in anticipation of HHS's Health and Human Services national rollout of a COVID-19 vaccine, which is set to begin, well, right now, mid-December. CNBC, reporting on Azar's comments, noted that Tiberius, a software program developed and managed by Palantir, will help the federal government allocate the amount of vaccines each state will receive. And before I go on, find what is a Palantir, find what is a panopticon. Panopticon. So the software program developed and managed by Palantir, that would be Tiberius, will help the federal government allocate the amount of vaccines each state will receive, and local officials will use Tiberius to decide where every allocated dose will go, from local doctors' offices to large medical centers. According to that report and others, Tiberius would collect data from U.S. government agencies as well as from local and state governments, pharmaceutical firms, vaccine manufacturers, and companies like McKesson that have been contracted for the coming vaccine distribution. Palantir's role in Operation Warp Speed was only announced in late October, with mainstream news outlets such as the Wall Street Journal reporting that the company was creating a new software product that would manage the production and allocation of COVID-19 vaccines in the operations campaign. That massive data will include a wide range of demographic, employment, and public health data sets that will be used to identify the location of priority populations and make related decisions regarding the allocation of vaccine doses. Okay. Thank you for playing. Thank you for playing God in that sense. Tiberius will also allow officials to proactively identify distribution bottlenecks, inventory constraints, and gaps in administration across key populations. AFP confirmed the Wall Street Journal's reporting and noted that Tiberius would provide Palantir with access to sensitive health information so that it could help identify high priority populations at highest risk of infection. The Business Insider website noted that Tiberius would be capable of showing areas with high proportions of healthcare workers, clinically vulnerable people, elderly people, or any other demographic deemed to be a target population by Operation Warp Speed. A separate report at military.com quoted Health and Human Services Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy Paul Mango as stating that delivery timetables and vaccine delivery locations were being mapped out by Tiberius, which enables officials to see how many people in a given target population are in any U.S. zip code. Okay. Palantir's Tiberius uses the software that manages Health and Human Services Protect, a secretive database that hoards information related to the spread of COVID-19 gathered from more than 225 data sets, including demographic statistics, community-based tests, and a wide range of state-approved state-provided data. HHS Protect has been criticized by several public health experts and epidemiologists, among others, because of the sudden decision by Health and Human Services to force U.S. hospitals to provide all data on COVID-19 cases and patient information directly to HHS Protect. Interesting. Hospitals have been threatened with the loss of Medicare or Medicaid funding if they decline to regularly feed all of their COVID-19 patient data and test results into the Health and Human Services Protect database. HHS Protect, notably, contains protected health information, which several U.S. senators warned in July raises serious privacy concerns, you don't say. According to a group of Democratic senators and representatives, neither HHS nor Palantir has publicly detailed what it plans to do with this PHI, or protected health information, or what privacy safeguards have been put into place, if any. They added that they were concerned that without any safeguards, data in HHS Protect could be used by other federal agencies in unexpected, unregulated, and potentially harmful ways, such as in the law enforcement context. Book called Unintended Consequences comes to mind. Palantir is well known for its controversial contract work with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, part of the Department of Homeland Security, that uses Palantir software in immigration raids. HHS Protect is also controversial for its newly added artificial intelligence-driven predictive component, which uses pre-written algorithms to simulate behaviors and forecast possible outcomes. HHS has asserted that this AI component, called HHS Vision, was not built with software components purchased from Palantir, but with software from a smaller government contractor with close ties to IBM, another intelligence-linked tech giant. From a long time ago. In addition to the massive information Palantir has access to through HHS Protect, the company is also a member of the COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition, a collaborative private industry response involving big tech, NGOs, and healthcare corporations that share and leverage real-time data, best practices, and critical expertise for the official purpose of preserving healthcare delivery and protecting people, in quotations, during the coronavirus crisis. The manufactured coronavirus crisis. Oh, coronavirus is there. But everything around it has been manufactured. Other members, aside from Palantir, include Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, and IBM, as well as the CIA's InQtel, IN-Q-Tel, or hyphen, and the murky U.S. intelligence contractor, the MITRE Corporation, M-I-T-R-E Corporation. The massive amount of data shared by the coalition's members, which also includes most major electronic health record companies in the U.S., is aimed at unlocking large-scale analytics for COVID-19. Tiberius, like HHS Protect, utilizes Palantir's Gotham software, which has been honed over a decade of partnership with military, civil, and intelligence communities, according to Palantir's product manager for Gotham, Ryan Biermeister. In recent years, it has incorporated more aspects related to machine learning and artificial intelligence. According to Forbes, Gotham accumulates vast amounts of personal data that allow it to map a person's family members and business associates, as well as email addresses, phone numbers, current and previous addresses, bank accounts, social security numbers, height, weight, and eye color. It is usually favored by law enforcement and intelligence agencies and has been used controversially by several police departments, including in Los Angeles and New Orleans, as a cornerstone of predictive policing or pre-crime initiatives. A HHS spokeswoman stated that Tiberius will not use personally identifiable information. when I see it. Other reports have noted that Tiberius is involved to some extent in the clinical trials for COVID-19 vaccine candidates, which would also provide Tiberius with access to the data from those trials, including how various population subgroups, in quotations, react to a given vaccine candidate. As reported in part 1 of this series, the Johns Hopkins guidance on which the vaccine allocation strategy was based, notes that it is likely that certain adverse effects may occur more frequently in certain population subgroups. Those very subgroups with the greatest risk of experiencing adverse effects, ethnic minorities, are also the same subgroups set to be prioritized by the U.S. government and identified by Tiberius to be vaccinated first during the official rollout of Operation Warp Speed. Tellingly, those same ethnic minorities flagged by Johns Hopkins as priority groups are the same minorities that Palantir is best known for targeting through their controversial contracts with Department of Homeland Security's Immigration and Customs Enforcement and law enforcement agencies. Palantir and the militarization of healthcare. Tiberius is the most recent addition to and perhaps the most emblematic of Palantir's moves into the growing field of public health surveillance. In addition to Palantir's contracts related to HHS Protect, the company has also scored other COVID-19 related contracts with subdivisions of the HHS. As one example, it was Palantir that built the CDC web app for monitoring the spread of COVID-19, which has been actively collecting data since March of 2020. The technology for this project was built on Palantir's Foundry software and takes in a range of anonymized data from U.S. hospitals and healthcare agencies, including lab test results, emergency department statuses, bed capacity, and ventilator supply, end quote. In early October, the National Institutes for Health Center for Advanced Translational Sciences awarded Palantir a $36 million contract for, quote, enterprise data integration and data management, end quote, giving the National Institute of Health the Foundry-based public health software as well. In addition, according to federal procurement records, the U.S. Coast Guard contracted with Palantir in April to help with its COVID-19 readiness system. Palantir's contracting with the NIH preceded the COVID-19 crisis by a matter of months, with the company winning a NIH contract in January to provide comprehensive data capabilities for the President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, according to Forbes. Palantir is also gaining comparable data access to the UK population. In March, the UK's National Health Service awarded the company a $1.3 million contract to help develop its COVID-19 data store, with a similar mandate to help UK officials understand how to allocate resources appropriately. According to CNBC, the NHS health records which Palantir has gained access to includes patient names, ages, addresses, health conditions, treatments and medicines, allergies, tests, scans, x-ray results, whether a patient smokes or drinks, and hospital admission and discharge information. More recently, the NHS has been in talks for a little over a month with Palantir to see about the company playing a role in quote-unquote sensitive contact tracing. Aside from the UK, Palantir has claimed to be involved in the COVID-19 response efforts of at least 10 other governments. All right, they're making some good money at Palantir, in addition to the US and the UK. These lucrative public health contracts are set to be a long-term boon for the company, which recently went public. As Investor Place explained in late November, the reemergence of the pandemic this fall and winter in the US and Europe will lift Palantir's revenue. Can't imagine it was suffering before. Meanwhile, just as Palantir has been acquiring contact tracing contracts, contact tracing contracts throughout the Western world during 2020. The company has also been dramatically expanding its contracting work with the U.S. military, which has also been playing an outsized role in the COVID-19 response, especially with Operation Warp Speed. Though the military has contracted with Palantir for years, the company has recently acquired more contracts than ever with the Department of Defense, and it has recently supplanted long-favored defense contractors like Raytheon, winning several key bids. Wow, that's impressive. Raytheon's been around for forever, I think. In February of 2020, Palantir was awarded a massive $823 million contract with BAE Systems for the U.S. Army's Distributed Common Ground System, and a month later the company was awarded an $80 million contract with the U.S. Navy to create and manage a new logistics system. Then in April, Palantir won a contract with the newly created U.S. Space Force to build a common operating picture of space. At the end of November, Palantir was awarded a contract of an undisclosed sum by the Army's Futures Command, a command focused on Army modernization with a heavy emphasis on AI and machine learning. Palantir's increasingly successful acquisition of top military contracts began in earnest last year. In March of 2019, Palantir won an $800 million contract to build the Army's new AI-driven battlefield intelligence system. Then, in October 2019, Palantir scored a 2-year, $91 million contract to develop AI and machine learning capabilities for U.S. Army Research Laboratory. The deal includes both their Foundry and Gotham products, with Foundry spotting and flagging risks and Gotham integrating multiple data sets into one. By the end of last year, Palantir had scored yet another multi-million-dollar contract with the military for the Army's Project Vantage. Also in December 2019, it was revealed that Palantir had taken over the Pentagon's AI drone assassination program, known as Project Maven, which had proved too controversial even for Google, the company that had originally won the Maven contract. While it may seem odd that Palantir would simultaneously win massive contracts from healthcare agencies and the military has in fact been heavily driving the takeover of U.S. healthcare by the national security state during 2020. Through partnerships with other leading Silicon Valley firms, the Pentagon is playing a major role in the COVID-19 response through Warp Speed, but it also is involved in other public health efforts that are technically unrelated, including predictive cancer diagnosis and fitness wearables. In addition, HHS, under the leadership of the HHS Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, Robert Kadlec, dramatically deepened its partnerships with the Pentagon's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, over the same period. Palantir not only fits right in with this larger Pentagon-led initiative to militarize healthcare nationwide, but the company is at its core a tool of surveillance and oppression. As the previously cited reports have detailed, Operation Warp Speed is being almost completely managed by the U.S. military, along with the Department of Homeland Security and and the National Security Agency, as opposed to civilian healthcare agencies, which, as noted in part 1 of this series, are significantly less involved than in previous national vaccination efforts and have even been barred from attending some Warp Speed meetings. Oh, really? Okay. I'm going to read that again because I was busy sneezing. As the previously cited reports have detailed, Operation Warp Speed is being mostly completely managed by the U.S. military, along with Department of Homeland Security and the National Security Agency, as opposed to civilian healthcare agencies, which, as noted in part 1 of this series, are significantly less involved than previous national vaccination efforts have been and have even been barred from attending some warp speed meetings. That's interesting. Civilian healthcare agencies barred from attending some warp speed meetings. Can't imagine why that would be. The DHS, NSA, and the military all have multi-million-dollar contracts with Palantir. In July, a government chart was obtained by STAT, that showed that roughly 60 military officials, including at least 4 generals involved in the leadership of Operation Warp Speed, have never worked in healthcare or vaccine development. One senior federal health official told STAT he was surprised by the number of soldiers in military uniform walking around the health department's headquarters in Washington, D.C., and said that recently he'd seen more than 100 officials in the warp speed corridors wearing... Now this doesn't even make sense. This really doesn't even make sense. Desert storm fatigues. First, I'd question who this person is and what they actually saw. Unless they're a civilian who has no clue what they're talking about. So, given Palantir's emerging role as the public health police, it's worth taking a step back to examine its record of enabling the racism and the militarism of U.S. state violence. As noted by The Guardian earlier this year, Palantir is well known in defense and policing worlds. Palantir has come under fire as a result of the company's contracts with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, including its creation of an intelligence system used by ICE that is known as Investigative Case Management. The IB Times described ICM, Investigative Case Management, as a vast ecosystem of data to help immigration officials in identifying targets and creating cases against them. That also provides ICE agents with access to databases managed by other federal agencies. ICM further gives ICE access to targets' personal and sensitive information, such as background on schooling, employment, family relationships, phone records, immigration history, biometrics data, criminal records, as well as home and work addresses. The $92 million relationship between ICE and Palantir should cause concern, considering Palantir will be in charge of allocating quote-unquote tailored COVID-19 vaccinations to the same minorities they're helping a militarized law enforcement agency target, build case against, and deport. Okay, so obviously illegals. In addition, as noted in part 1 of this series, Warp Speed is set to explicitly prioritize both incarcerated individuals and illegals. It says undocumented immigrants of color. I'm not even going to play that again. They're illegals. Meaning that those incarcerated in ICE detention facilities, many of whom were placed there as a result of Palantir's other software, will be flagged by Palantir's Tiberius software. Palantir's work with ICE is hardly the sole reason controversies surround the company. It also has a close relationship with local law enforcement agencies and police departments across the country, whom they supply with policing tools that overwhelmingly target minority groups. Some of those tools are predictive, meaning that they flag individuals who have not committed a crime, but according to Palantir's data mining and algorithms, are likely to do so in the future. Future crime. Nice. As noted by The Guardian in 2017, U.S. law enforcement in various parts of the country have been using Palantir to predict who will commit a crime by swooping Minority Report style on suspects. Wonder which actually came first, the movie or the software? My dad always said that anything we see is always 20 years behind what actually is. Police departments that have used Palantir's policing tools include, but are not limited to, the NYPD, LAPD, Chicago PD, Virginia State Police, and the New Orleans PD. Per its proponents, Palantir's policing tools harness the technology of big data to help police departments streamline law enforcement, thereby enhancing efficiency. Critics, however, say Palantir's tech creates racist feedback loops in which a disproportionate amount of police resources are allocated to historically hyper-policed communities. Notably, Palantir's predictive policing methods were developed during the war in Iraq, a conflict where many legal red lines were crossed by the occupying forces. These aggressive policing techniques, forged during the fires of the so-called global war on terrorism, in which Iraqi citizens were almost completely denied their civil and human rights, are now being implemented in the US and elsewhere. Palantir's law enforcement tools crunch data and identify certain areas of cities or neighborhoods that should receive an uptick of police presence. The Palantir police technology can create chronic offender bulletins, which attempt to predict and identify potential repeat offenders in problem areas. After someone is deemed a possible or probable repeat offender, extra attention and enhanced surveillance techniques are deployed against that individual. Similarly, once an entire neighborhood is flagged by Palantir's algorithms as densely populated with repeat offenders, the neighborhood is considered a hotspot zone and is then more heavily policed, increasing the chance that residents will be stopped for minor infractions. The Stop LAPD Spying Coalition criticizes the technological assumptions that underlie Palantir's algorithm-based policing as pathologizing individuals and entire neighborhoods. Say that. It says that the programs enable the continuation of decades of discriminatory and racist policing under the apparent neutrality of objective data. Palantir's policing tools allow jurisdictions that normally would never communicate or share information to do so, resulting in a greater concentration of police power. As Wired noted, when enough jurisdictions join Palantir's interconnected web of police departments, government agencies, and databases, the resulting data trove resembles a pay-to-access social network, a Facebook of crime that's both invisible and largely unaccountable to the citizens whose behavior it tracks. Of all Palantir's predictive policing efforts, arguably the most notorious took place in New Orleans. As revealed by The Verge in February 2018, Palantir had been secretly running a predictive policing pilot program for the New Orleans Police Department for 6 years and had been hiding it from the population of New Orleans and its city council. Key city council members were quoted as stating that they had no idea that the city had any sort of relationship with Palantir, nor were they aware that Palantir used